Hello, I'm Reformed Mythologist Nate Morgan Locke.
And I'm media producer Thomas Thorogood. Hello, Nate. Good to be with you.
Hello, Thomas.
You've been doing a series called 5 Minute Myths, where you've been whizzing through a variety of myths from different cultures.
Yeah.
And so today we're going to look at the one about Demeter. So you can go and check out the 5-minute video where Nate goes through the story. There's a little animation and then you share some thoughts on that. But in this conversation, we're going to get a bit deeper into the themes of harvest and seed time and Thanksgiving that are raised in the myth. So we're actually coming up to Thanksgiving, aren't we? It's next week.
I believe so. Yeah.
Now, I've lived in the UK my whole life, so Thanksgiving isn't really a thing here, but you've lived in the States, haven't you? So,
So I'm very familiar with harvests festivals within the UK.
That's true. We do those, don't we?
We do those.
In schools especially.
Yeah. The idea of celebrating Thanksgiving, it's a peculiarly American thing, and that's because it's commemorating the Pilgrim Fathers who travelled across the Atlantic from Northern Europe to Plymouth Rock, I believe they landed on 1620, I'm going to say. And they land there on the Mayflower, and they're in the New World, and they've got this kind of freedom. But of course, now they've got to work out how to survive. What are they going to eat, and how they're going to kind of sustain themselves. Yeah. And so, Thanksgiving is a commemoration of the first harvest after the Pilgrim Fathers had arrived. So it's going back to 1621. That is now commemorated with turkey and a Macy's Thanksgiving Day parade and lots of pumpkins, pumpkin pies, and things like that.
Pecan
pie.
Yeah, it's notable, isn't it, that we have days, sort of single days in the calendar that are especially dedicated to being thankful for where our food comes from. Because would you say that that's not something we naturally do as a culture? We don't tend to think about our food.
Yeah, I mean we're all quite removed from the seasonal processes. Right, so many of us are not, harvesting our own vegetables and planting our own vegetables and so we just go into Tesco and we expect, okay, there's going to be strawberries there, even though it's December. Well, because we can get these strawberries from Tunisia, we don't need to wait till they're in season here, because the food economy is now global, and so you can sort of pull in food from everywhere anytime. And so our sense of appreciation for particular things being only available because they're only in season at a particular time is lost. And I think that tends to breed a certain kind of ingratitude or a kind of entitlement. Okay, like I ought to be able to get this all the time. Which previous generations, I think, had less access to the wide variety of foods that we do.
Well, let's whiz through the myth, shall we, Nate, and get into some of those themes. So Demeter is the Greek goddess of the grain, and it begins in quite a dramatic way, this myth.
Demeter is the golden Greek goddess of the grain, an Olympian, daughter to Kronos and Rhea, sister to Zeus and Hades and all the others. And our story begins when Demeter's daughter, the delicate Persephone, is playing in a meadow with all her friends. They're making daisy chains when out from the dust explodes her double uncle Hades on a chariot with his coal-black horses. He snatches her up like a weed and Persephone screams as he descends to dark Tartarus.
What's going on there?
It's kind of child abduction. Nice way to start the myth. And what is happening? Well, Hades is taking his niece, his double niece, because he is brother to both her mom and dad, because Persephone's mother is Demeter, and Persephone's father is Zeus, and Zeus, Demeter, and Hades are brothers and sisters. It's quite a kind of brutal very uncomfortable, not especially kind of family-friendly start to the story, which is the abduction of Persephone for the purpose of making her his bride by her uncle.
So then Demeter consults the other gods, because you'd assume that if anyone knows where her daughter has been taken, it would be the other gods.
Demeter begins to search for her daughter, and after 9 long, tearful days, can't locate her. Hecate, goddess of boundaries, appears on the 10th day to tell Demeter she heard Persephone's helpless cry as she crossed down into the underworld, but didn't see who did the terrible deed. Demeter asks the sun god Helios if he saw, but he's unable to shed any light on the matter.
Something I've always wondered when reading these stories is to what degree are the Greek gods all-knowing? Because sometimes they seem to have a pretty good idea of what's going on in the different realms. But they're not omniscient in the way that we would believe the god to be. So what's going on there?
They and partly because they've all had their authority portioned off, right? So they're responsible for certain aspects of life, but not other aspects of life. So they're all a bit kind of assistant to the regional manager type gods, rather than like God Almighty. They are like the God overall, which, because of course our Christian view, whether people call themselves Christian or not, is that there is one God who must have these attributes, the omniscient, omnipotent, kind of the omni type vision of who God must be.
Got on an omnibus the other day.
Did you? What is an omnibus?
I don't know.
I don't think
it is the bus of the buses.
It's referenced. Yeah. It's all the buses. It's referenced. I think Chesterton talks about it at one point.
Right. Yeah.
It's again a Chestertonian phrase. The omnibus. I was on the omnibus, but yeah. So the omni God that some people sort of say that's what being God is. Yeah. Well, these gods, the Greek gods, the Roman gods, they definitely don't fit into that category because they're incredibly limited, not just in what they know and understand, but also what their areas of responsibility are. Weirdly, Hecate, we might not be pronouncing that correctly because I just go for it.
It's actually pronounced Rachel.
So Hecate is the goddess of boundaries. So if anyone should know if someone is passing between kind of Earth and the underworld, it ought to be Hecate. But she says that she heard Persephone scream but didn't know where she went. And then Helios, who's the again, I think it's Helios, not Helios, but he is the a Greek sun god. Who is unable to shed any light on the matter.
Nice. So then Demeter, after not getting any help from the gods, goes to the mortal human town of Eleusis and becomes an undercover nanny to a rich family.
Since she's getting nowhere on Mount Olympus, in grief, Demeter visits the mortals. She disguises herself as an old crone, sits down by a well near the town of Eleusis, and hires herself out as a nanny to a super-rich family. As part of the baby's bedtime routine, Demeter tries to make him immortal by holding him in a fire, which, because she's not really a nanny but an Olympian goddess, apparently works. But then the boy's mother rushes out to stop her because she thinks she is just a murderous nanny woman, and so, angry at the interruption, Demeter reveals herself to be the Greek divinity with specific oversight of plant life. The baby boy didn't get enough of the fire to become immortal and lies on the floor crying.
Yeah. What is going on there?
It's I think it's also the plot of a Hulk Hogan film called Mr. Nanny, where he's undercover, and The Pacifier, starring Vin Diesel, where he has to pretend to be a...
Is he a Navy SEAL or something?
Anyway, yeah, but people pretending to look after children. It's an interesting... It's a rich vein for kind of comedy and drama. Yeah. Demeter leaves Mount Olympus and goes back down to, as you say, Eleusis. Is sitting by a well, and then these two sisters come along and they say, "Hey lady, would you like a job?" And she says, "Sure." And then she's like, "You could look after our little brother so that our mom doesn't need to anymore." And so that's what Demeter goes off to do, to be a nanny.
And she does do that. And one of the first things she does is she takes the baby and holds him in a fire.
Yes.
Which is shocking, but apparently it's to make him immortal because she's a goddess.
Yeah, so there are a few
works.
things like this where someone, where a mortal human being is taken by the gods or a goddess, and they try to make them immortal. And so in this occasion, I think the baby's called Demephon. And so Demeter is holding Demephon in this fire, is then interrupted, and we'll get onto that. But it's similar to when Achilles is dipped in the river to make him immortal, and it's only his heel that is kind of kept out of the water, and so that's his point of vulnerability, is going to be his Achilles heel.
Is that where we get the phrase Achilles heel from?
I hope so. Because that's what I've been telling everyone. So
Yeah.
This idea of there being this means by which mortals can become immortal, but that regularly within these stories there is a point of vulnerability, or that the process of making someone immortal doesn't quite work out. And interestingly, that is the basis, I think, the opening of the Disney version of Hercules from the 90s, which, let's just say, it takes some liberties with Greek mythology.
I would never have guessed.
Yeah, it's a very kind of sanitized kind of version. But James Woods, who plays Hades in that, is just absolutely incredible. To some degree, there's always a kind of elasticity with mythology, because very rarely do you have a kind of, here is the approved, authorized version of a myth. So that it's very difficult to kind of pin down lots of these myths. I mean, the version that we used for this 5-minute myth was, I think, the kind of earliest solid kind of scripted version, which is the Homeric hymn to Demeter. So it's called the Homeric hymn because it's kind of associated with Homer, even though I don't think any scholars would be completely committed to the idea that the same Homer, if he even existed, who wrote the Iliad and the Odyssey, also wrote the Homeric hymns. But it's certainly written in the same kind of style.
Right, so Demeter's holding this baby in the fire to try and make him immortal. Why is it a fire? Is there something about fire sort of refining things, like smelting?
Smelting? Yeah.
I don't actually know what that means, but fire is often seen as, like, through fire, things are transformed.
And so biblically, we've got the idea of a refining fire. So things pass through the fire, and then what comes out are going to be kind of the precious things. Stubble is going to be burned away, but then you're going to have these kind of precious metals and stones which are have passed through fire and have been purified by the fire. And presumably Demeter, even though she is pretending to be just a regular nanny lady, she is still an Olympian goddess, and so she's able to kind of do this work.
Yes, until the mum comes in and is horrified by seeing her baby dangling over this fire, intervenes, stops the process. I mean, I don't blame her.
No.
It's not a good look, is it?
No, but Demeter's very cross with her for that.
Yeah.
And so she then institutes all sorts of things that she now basically establishes the Eleusinian mystery religion of Demeter. And so says, you've got to build me a temple and you've got to perform these particular rites, and then if you do these things, I might let you have some food.
So that's kind of her rage is kind of making it a bit harder for these humans.
But now Demeter's really angry because she's still very much grieving the loss of Persephone. Demeter becomes so sad that all the leaves are brown, and if she had the choice, the sky would be grey. Having withheld her goddess power over the germination process, refusing to let any plants grow, Demeter tells the mortals to build her a temple in Eleusis and establish a mystery religion where they will make sacrifices to her to see if they can cheer her up. It seems rather unlikely to make any difference though, since there is literally only one thing Demeter wants in this story, and it's not humans doing sacrifices and rituals and stuff.
So when Demeter's sad, the leaves start falling off the trees and the plants start dying. It affects the germination process. So is that, as you were saying earlier, how a lot of the Greek gods interacted with creation, in that if one of them isn't able to do their thing or is taken out of action, then some aspect of reality starts to fall apart?
Yeah, I think so. There's the idea, because you've tied the emotional state of the Olympian gods to the processes that they have responsibility for, that then you're going to see that played out in terms of the governing of the world. I think as Christians we would recognize something akin to that, but of course we don't have in God, Father, Son, and Spirit, we don't have the same kind of capricious volatility and kind of there's a real emotional instability to the Greek gods, the Roman gods as well, and the Norse gods. Like they all have this kind of they're quite kind of prickly and they're kind of warring against each other. And so then you see that played out in the way that they run the world. Our accounting for why the world is the way that it is isn't because the gods are having a dust-up. It's because the world is now a fallen place. And cursed is the ground because of Adam and Eve's sin.
So coming to the sort of conclusion of the story.
Now that all the human race might die because they've got nothing to eat, Zeus, the absolute scumbag father-uncle to Persephone, finally starts to sort things out. He tells Hermes to go down to Tartarus and ask Hades if Demeter can have Persephone back. Hermes obliges and Hades agrees, but not before he forces Persephone to take a bite of a pomegranate. As the chariots arrive back in the lands of light, there's a beautiful reunion of Demeter and her daughter. But apparently, because of some underworld dietary regulations, if you eat down there, you'll have to stay down there, Persephone must descend to the land of the dead during the winter months, and every spring make her way back home to her mother.
What's going on there?
What's weird with it is that there are so many things within these myths which have a kind of resemblance to things in the Christian gospel, but they're slightly sort of distorted and slightly sort of twisted. So if you think about what is the sin, what is the action that is performed by Adam and Eve in the garden, which demonstrates their lack of trust in God's goodness? Well, it's to eat the fruit. And so there are these kind of catastrophic consequences as Eve eats the fruit and then gives some to her husband who was with her, and he took some and he ate it, right? So there's a kind of eating fruit had this massive impact from the Garden of Eden. So it's interesting that for Persephone, in terms of the impact on Persephone is that she's going to have to return to the underworld for 6 months a year, is that happens because of eating fruit. Now, it's much more closely tied into how much of the fruit she's eaten. I think in some versions it's like she ate 6 seeds, therefore 6 months she'll have to spend down in the underworld. So there is a real... there's just that interesting parallel of fruit eating, which is the problem.
Why a pomegranate?
Yeah, so pomegranates are full of seeds. They're very seedy. They're very seedy fruits, and you can find references to the pomegranates in the Bible. So I think the high priests in their outfits are kind of decorated with pictures of pomegranates. There are pomegranates of different colours painted in the temple, and so as a symbol of real kind of fertility and fruitfulness, a pomegranate's great because it's got so many kind of seeds in it. And I think arguably you could say, well, okay, what was the fruit that Adam and Eve ate in the garden? It doesn't specify it, but a pomegranate would be a pretty good guess, or what is the fruit of the tree of life that you could reach out and pick from? Again, not specified, but a pomegranate would be a good symbol to kind of refer to. So the pomegranates do appear in multiple different places in the biblical picture.
And what would you say is like the main difference between the view in the Demeter myth of harvest and the Christian view?
I think there are multiple differences. One of them is the seed of the woman. So in the myth of Demeter and Persephone, it is Persephone who is the seed of Demeter, and she is the one who goes down into the underworld and rises up again. Whereas in the Christian message, Jesus is the seed of the woman Eve, and he's also the seed of Abraham, and so he is the promised seed who will come, and he will go down into the underworld, and only once, and then to rise up again. So it's not that he's going to have to keep on going back down into the earth again and again and again. I think another major difference is the fact that in the Demeter myth, the gods are fighting against each other in a way. Hades is kind of battling against his sister, and so there's a kind of sibling rivalry and argument that is the cause of this kind of process of seed time and harvest. Whereas in the gospel account, it is the unified action of the one God, Father, Son, and Spirit, in that the Father sends the Son as the seed of the woman by the Spirit, that he might be crucified, buried, or died, then buried, then raised up again, and that all of that is God unified action, rather than it's the kind of accidental, clumsy, happenstance result of a kind of argument and people battling against each other, which produced this now apparently accidental process by which Persephone has to say goodbye to her mum every year and go back down to her husband, and then leave her husband and go back to her mum again. So
it's good news.
Yeah, it's good news, and it takes place because it incorporates the tragic, because it is for sinners that Christ comes. So his incarnation, his death and resurrection, his ascension is done for the benefit of those who have fallen. So Adam has fallen, therefore Christ as the second Adam has come down into the darkness, into the depths, to rescue us out from the grave, to be raised up again. And it's a comic story because the result is a positive one, rather than, which interestingly with the Demeter myth is that this is like a cyclical thing that's going to keep on coming back around.
We've got some YouTube comments if you'd like to have a look at those. So you've sort of addressed this one already, but Robert and Alison said, do you think the Greeks genuinely thought autumn and winter were caused by Persephone's descent into Tartarus, or is that not really how the Greek myths work? So, did they write this simply as, well, here's why we have seasons? Or is that kind of a byproduct of they're telling a story, they're reflecting on harvest as a thing, and built into that is a possible explanation for why we have seasons?
I suppose one aspect of it, I don't think the Greeks were believing that it was necessarily real events that were happening, but that they did believe in Demeter. Right, they were actively worshipping at the temple of Demeter, and so they were offering sacrifices, and you can't discount that by saying, you know, they were just sort of playing it out. But I think the power of the myth in terms of their understanding is recognizing with kind of the tragic element of seed time, the death of the seed as it goes down into the earth, and recognizing the kind of the joyfulness of Thanksgiving or harvest when the seed rises up again. In terms of, yes, they were probably acting out Persephone's descent, or believed that the world was acting out Persephone's descent into Tartarus each winter. But yes, I don't believe that they were totally convinced that this was a historical kind of fact.
We have this other comment here from Matthew Fernley. He said, "Makes me wonder whether the god of algorithms is really going to be pleased by this offering of a comment sacrifice."
Well, I think the spiritual dimensions of the YouTube algorithm have not been sufficiently studied, and maybe we do need to do an episode on the digital myths of what's going on, the pleasing the gods of the algorithm. There's something going on. It's not totally zeros and ones.
Well, speaking of the YouTube algorithm and harvest, you made a short film called Mr. Thankful, which was Speak Life's first harvest short film. And that has recently sort of been picked up strangely by the YouTube algorithm. What were you trying to do with that film, Mr. Thankful?
I suppose we're trying to recognize that gratitude and thankfulness is ought to be part of human experience, and so being thankful and realizing that we are in relationship with God to be able to say thanks to Him is actually really helpful, because if you believe that there isn't a God, if you're convinced that the world is just an accidental thing, when you find great joy at something, you haven't got anyone to say thank you to. And so people end up saying these weird things, "Oh, just say thank you to the universe," sort of thing. And you think, well, it's weak because it's impersonal. And when you receive a gift, you want to say thank you. And so that was an opportunity for us to spend 24 hours with the world's most grateful, thankful man, and just to see what a kind of refreshing experience that would be. So yeah, it's just quite a fun way of kind of exploring the joyfulness of harvest, the joyfulness of the provision that we get every day.
Yeah, so do go and check that out. We'll put a link in the description if you want to watch Mr. Thankful, and also a link to the 5-minute myth version of Demeter. But on that note, thank you, and thank you for watching.
Yes, please remember that media consumption is optional. You are under no obligation to watch either of the two videos that Thomas has just mentioned, but we're very glad that you were here.